Wow, huge news recently about lawsuit and all kinds of stuff that agents and associations and the whole industry is just up in an uproar about. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to be talking about buyer representation agreements. Sometimes they're called buyer broker agreements and why they're so important today. So let's get started. With me today is my friend, Joel Carlson. Joel Carlson, what's your nickname? Billy Bob or something like that? Joel Bob?
Joel Bob.
Joel Bob. Dr. Joel Bob.
Because when I used to talk in the South, everybody was Billy Bob or Junior Bob or somebody. So I became Joel Bob.
So Joel Bob, or Joel Carlson, or as I like to call him, Dr. Carlson, because he is like the expert on so many different things. We serve together on the board of the Realtors Commercial Alliance of Orange County, which is the only association of realtors in the state of California that is solely dedicated to commercial real estate. And the reason we're here is because commercial real estate agents, whether they're realtors or not realtors, as a matter of practice, we tend to use buyer representation agreements every day with every buyer we talk to. But for some reason or another, our compatriots who are residential realtors, they seem to be, a little taken aback by the whole idea of having a professional relationship with their clients. I don't understand it. But what do you think about this whole thing, Joel?
Well, it has always been my philosophy that I want to get paid. Whenever I talk to realtors, I always say to them, how many of you ever dealt with a buyer that you showed them everything in the multiple listing and they bought through somebody else? And they all raise their hands. I say, had you have had a buyer representation agreement, not only could you have done a better job for them, but you could have made sure that you gotten paid by just explaining that form. So I think it's too important that the agents right now, we got these lawsuits coming from the East Coast, and they're going to affect us from one or two aspects. Really, the bottom line is not going to change. It's just how it's presented. So that's what we're going to be going over today.
Excellent. You know how we've been talking about AI every once in a while?
Yes,
kind
sir.
of another hot topic.
Yep.
This particular image that you see here, do you recognize that from anywhere?
I do not. I was looking at it. It's got some ocean in the background, and then it's got palm trees. I figured it was in the Southern California area, but it's no city I know of.
Yeah. Well, that's because Bing Image Generation created it for me today, specific for this presentation. And I asked it to give me different types of commercial property with the ocean in the background. And I think it did a pretty good job of putting it together, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's get into our program today. So here's what we're going to talk about. We got 4 things that we're going to talk about, and we got multiple things under each of these bullets. So we'll be going over those in the next 20, 30 minutes. Not sure how long it'll take, but we want to do a good job for you. So the first thing we want to talk about is, why are they a hot topic? The next thing we're going to talk about is, what are the benefits for the broker of having a buyer rep agreement? What are the buyer's benefits to having the agreement? And finally, we're going to talk about what are the buyer objections, and we're going to give some things that you can use, word tracks, ideas that you can use so that you can get your buyer broker agreement signed. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Perfect. Let's jump right into broker benefits. So the first benefits, Joel, what is this?
This is the legal clarification of your relationship. In the state of California, you represent the buyer, the seller, or both. You can be a dual agent in this particular instance. In this case, what we're doing is we're saying, hi, buyer, you want to buy real estate? You need to be represented by your own agent. If I'm being paid by the seller, the implication is I'm representing the seller. So what this does is it clarifies our relationship. I'm a buyer representation agent.
Okay. And the form, if you happen to have a listing and you're representing the buyer, it does allow you to do dual representation, correct?
Absolutely. Yes. So if a seller comes along and says, hey, I want you to represent me, and the buyer says, I want you to represent me, you can do both. In the state of California, we can be dual agents. That's been around since 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
No, that's old. That's older than you. You weren't even there when that happened.
Oh, no.
All right. Now, professionalism is something we're all interested in, correct?
We have traditionally represented the seller and been professionals to the seller. As far as our constitution here in California, we got a constitution here in California, believe it or not. It says you are a real estate professional because you have a license issued by a state agency and you have a requirement of continuing education. Well, if I'm a professional for the seller, I need to also be a professional for the buyer. And that's why this particular benefit is I am representing you as the agent.
Well, not only that, but in my mind, so many people ask, why do you deserve these big bucks? You know, as an agent, I mean, you're collecting 2, 3, maybe 4% for representing me. I mean, some cases I've made as much as 7% to represent somebody. And it's like, well, why do you deserve that much of the transaction? And it's because I am a professional. I have over 40 years of experience in commercial real estate that I'm drawing upon to help you close this transaction and do it in a way that is expedient, less stressful, and hopefully in a way so that we can keep you out of trouble in the future. Looking for obstacles and issues before they arise so we can deal with them while they're small instead of when they're big. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. In the state of California at this moment in time, if you buy or sell a residence, 1 to 4 residential units, you are subject to 47 standard disclosures.
47 standard disclosures? Those poor residential agents.
47. It's unbelievable. And so somebody says, well, why do I need you? You're familiar with the 47? Well, let me show you.
Wow. I'm so happy I'm not selling residential real estate. But I'm glad that our residential friends are on this call, on this recording to listen to this. All right. So what's next?
Protecting your broker from circumvention. One of the situations that comes up is if I have an agreement and you decide you want to go someplace else, I have an agreement to say, wait a minute, you've signed this, you're my client. We do this with the listing on a house. So we have a house listing. Nobody else can come up and say, hey, Joel's a bum, cancel the listing and list with me. That's a violation of law. It's called restraint of trade. It's under our civil code. And it's also a violation of the code of ethics from the National Association of Realtors. Same thing happens with a buyer representation agreement. I have a listing with them. If they go out, they can say, hi, I deal with Joel. Joel is my agent. And they can bring out their vampire cards. And they can say, see, he's my agent. Right? That's how you keep them off you because you want to go to open houses, take a look at things. I can protect my time, effort, and energy and make a better presentation to you as a real estate, as a buyer of real estate.
I love it. Let's talk about fiduciary relationship because that's important, right?
Yeah. That was established in 1988 in our agency disclosure form. It says we have a fiduciary duty. Fiduciary duty is defined under law as the highest binding trust. So no matter if you represent the buyer or the seller or both, you have the highest binding trust. And what that does is we have a listing agreement with the seller. We haven't traditionally had one with the buyer. They both have the same fiduciary duties. Now it's established it in a written form that's more clear to our clients.
I'm really happy that you're doing this with me because you've got so much background information and I'm learning things even as we go today.
Great. My pleasure.
Haha. Now, this is probably the most important reason why brokers benefit from a buyer representation agreement is we get paid and we're protecting our paychecks.
That's right. What happens is, and I ask this in my classes, and I teach for the California Association of Realtors as a master instructor. I teach for the University of California at Irvine. And I have 3 offices, real estate offices. I'm dealing with my agents every day. I've got plenty of things to do. But one of the things I found out is when I ask, have you ever dealt with a buyer, showed them everything in the MLS and they bought through somebody else? And they all go, yeah. I say a buyer representation agreement would have protected you.
We didn't do something that we should have done earlier, is we didn't introduce ourselves. And I really appreciate the fact that you just told us that you're a master instructor for the California Association of Realtors and that you teach at UC Irvine. And I know that you serve on the board of the Realtors Commercial Alliance with me and that you're the past president. And I know that you've got a list of accolades that are longer than my arm. You're also a broker yourself, aren't you?
Absolutely. Yep, I've been a broker since 1982, have my own company. I'm always I've always been a kind of an independent kind of a broker, and we have 3 different offices, specialize in residential in Huntington Beach, resi-mercial in Seal Beach, and in Newport Beach, where my office is, it is strictly commercial.
Cool. And my name is Chris Vogt. I am your professional connector. I actually have 40 years of real estate experience prior to getting my license because I grew up in a family that bought, leased, and sold commercial real estate. Through my career, I've always been involved as an advisor or a corporate executive or in some other capacity where I was dealing with commercial real estate until I got my real estate license just over 6 years ago now, and started into commercial real estate about a year after I got my license, when I realized that at a residential real estate brokerage that I could do commercial real estate. There were secret agents doing commercial there. My first listing was kind of fun. It was a referral from a broker in New York City who referred me to a commercial real estate attorney in Southern California who connected me with his client with a recommendation that his client list with me a portfolio of 17 multifamily properties with a total listing value of over $256 million. Not bad for a first listing.
Not bad at all.
Yeah. Now, as we're recording this, I am the president-elect of the Realtors Commercial Alliance of Orange County, and I'm looking forward to being in that position and serving all of you with even greater ease and clarity than I have in the past.
Good. That's what I like to hear.
Yeah. So the buyers benefit from these agreements also. And that's really important because it's a legal agreement where they have rights and benefits with regards to their broker, right?
Absolutely. I'm not listing the house and I have a responsibility to the seller. I'm listing you and I have a responsibility to you as a real estate professional.
Excellent. And then, of course, there's a whole issue of dedicated representation. When you know you are in a relationship with your agent, hopefully you don't abuse it by calling them at midnight. But when you call, the agent should answer the phone and should be responsive to you, right?
Absolutely. The dedicated representation is this. If I have a listing, my first fiduciary duty is to the seller.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a buyer representation agreement, my first duty is to the buyer. It's the highest binding trust.
No, just for a moment, a little divergence, if you don't mind. So if you have a listing and you have a buyer rep agreement, and that buyer is looking for your listing, talk about the representation and that conflict of interest, maybe, was
Okay.
how some people talk about it. So how do you resolve that as an agent?
The whole idea is this. When the United States started, 1620, when Mayflower landed, they brought English common law. English common law says you can represent the buyer or you can represent the seller. When everything came west and it was settled with Spain in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, it said you must use Spanish law. And Spanish law says you can represent both buyer and seller. So we have had this for over a century of being able to represent. A lot of people say, well, when I talk back east, they always say to me, wait a minute, you're in Cal. How do you represent both buyer and seller? How can you do that? I say, it's easy. I'm schizophrenic.
Or bipolar.
They all think we're crazy out here anyway. But
well, the home of fruits and nuts, right?
Right. We have been doing this for a long time. We have it down and we have very specific laws in our agency disclosure form that talks about this is what your duties are if you represent the buyer. This is what your duties are if you represent the seller. And these are your duties if you represent both buyer and seller.
Perfect. And I do want to remind everyone that today we're talking in general terms. We're not offering any specific legal advice. And we want you to know that you should always contact your broker if you have any questions. And if you don't have a broker, or if your broker doesn't know the answers, you should contact your association of realtors. Most association of realtors have a legal hotline at their state level where you can get some support. Please get your legal support from a qualified legal professional. Let's talk more about fiduciary duty, or have we covered that enough?
The fiduciary duty, it is explained in your disclosure. And most of the states that I've talked to now have a fiduciary outline as to what your duties are as an agent representing the buyer, representing the seller, representing both if it is a dual agency state. So it's on a form, and it's usually referred to as the AD, agency disclosure.
Okay. All right. Now, access to professional experience. So a lot of these things we're talking about are kind of the flip side of the broker benefits, right?
Right. So as a buyer, I want to make sure that I'm represented by the most knowledgeable representative I can get who will do the best job for me. And if I specialize in buyer representation, I can represent both buyer and seller, but if I specialize in buyer representation, you as a buyer are always going to get better response and better work from me.
Perfect. All right. And then, of course, negotiation experience is very important.
Yeah. I look at it from an aspect of, I always look at these deals as if I'm purchasing them. I can't tell you what, I can't push on to my buyers and sellers what would be the best thing because that's a violation of law. However, I can say in this particular instance, I feel this would be a good deal from this aspect. And then I can negotiate from that strength. And I can show the seller, here's the reason why the buyer is making this kind of offer. And it's all explained in your different classes that you take concerning representing buyer broker representations.
Yeah. I just had a buyer contact me this morning. They're like, hopefully by the end of the day, we'll be ready to write an offer on this property. But oh, by the way, I noticed another property about 30 miles away. What do you think of that? And I said, well, where is it? And they told me where it is. And I'm like, I'd have to look at it. But my first impression based on the place that you said is I would definitely check the crime stats. That's not something I can do for you, but I would check the crime stats before I bought something there. But later in the day, I was looking at the property and I'm like, whoa, this is really interesting. I didn't check the crime stats, but this is like a class A property versus they were looking at a class C property and they were expecting to pay the same price per square foot. And so it's always important for us as professionals, not just to take the buyer and say, oh, you want to do this without doing your professional duty of representing them properly.
Yep, you got to be very careful about that.
Yeah. So buyers have objections. In fact, today, as it's appropriate, I will tell you about some of the objections that I received talking to my buyer. So the first one was, they're like, I've already been talking to the listing agent.
Yep. Well, who does the listing agent represent? Seller.
Exactly.
So you have nobody. They're going to get the same amount of commission. It's going to be paid by the seller. Seller's going to pay the representative, and they're going to get the other representative's commission also. So personally, I would rather have somebody on my side that's being paid so that they represent me.
Exactly. All right. And yeah, but we want to play the field. I was talking to someone 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, well, the first thing and I always start my relationship with a conversation about our relationship. And I always say, look, for us to work together, before I show you any property, before I spend an hour doing research for you, we're going to put together a buyer broker agreement. And the reason is because I want to know that when I'm investing my time, effort, energy, and experience in you, that I'm going to get paid at the end of the process. And I had someone just a couple of weeks ago, they're like, well, but my partner's a real estate agent. And when we come to do the deal, I want to do it with him. I'm like, why are you talking to me? And they didn't disclose that until we were 20 minutes into the conversation. It was crazy.
One of the things that I want to make sure that you understand is that you don't want to commit to one broker. Well, you want to be represented. in this particular day and age, with all the different disclosures and everything that's going on out there, you need somebody that's in your corner representing you. And if you say, well, I want to be open to go to all these different brokers, I always tell my agents, the first thing is, if you in any relationship, buyer seller relationship, that buyer, that seller has to buy you, and then they'll buy through you. So you've got to have the ability to put it out there and say, hi, these are the things that I've done. Do you trust me? If they trust you, you only need one.
Exactly. It's really fun dealing with this stuff. And it's fun because when I first became an agent, I saw the value of the buyer broker agreement, but it took me a few tries before I was able to properly articulate my value and my confidence in being able to help them so that they didn't object. So that's always fun too, as you grow. Oh, but here's the other thing that I think is important for us to mention, is because as commercial brokers, we're dealing in an arena where it's buyer beware. It's, we don't have the commercial market. There's a lot of stuff that if you're not careful, the sellers can get away with taking you to the cleaners, so to speak, and they won't necessarily get in trouble for it. But in the residential market, all of the regulation and the Department of Real Estate and everything is on the side of the consumer to protect the consumer. And so that's why you have 47 different disclosures and stuff for consumer protection. You don't have that in the commercial market. And for those of you residential agents who are looking at commercial, this is one of the things that you need to understand, and understand that it's your experience and knowledge of what happens in commercial market and what are the potential minefields and how to avoid them is why you're getting paid the big bucks.
Yeah, and one of the kickers on this whole thing is, well, I've had my real estate license for X amount of years. I've only been doing commercial for this amount of time.
Yeah, 3 transactions.
What does your broker say? My broker's been in the business 30 years, 40 years. Then that combined experience, that's what I call on. I'm a brand new agent in this area. I want to make sure that I've got the backing of my broker or their experienced agents so that I can help my clients.
Absolutely. All right. So if I find the property, why should I pay you, Joel? I've done all the work.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you something. Finding the property is the easiest part. Putting the deal together, getting all of the forms put together, getting all the financing putting together, getting it closed, that's what we get paid for. Finding the property, you can go out on the internet, anybody can find the property. It is the steps after, the months of renegotiations and disclosures and inspections that we have the expertise on that makes sure that we get the deal closed in a benefit to that particular buyer.
Well, in just today, again, in talking to a potential buyer, they're like, well, but I've already found all the properties. I'm like, have you? Well, they want to buy a property. And I said, did you realize that about 70%, maybe more, of commercial transactions, the property is never listed? And that's one of the reasons why we get paid our commission, is because we've built an established network of people we work with, and we have to go to our network sometimes to find you a better property than the ones that are listed. Because people don't realize that when a broker is list a property, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to call all of their existing clients and say, hey, I've got something for you. And because they want to get that dual-ended commission, right? And
Correct.
So then if none of their clients want the property, then they'll go to their fellow agents in their office because they want to keep that commission in-house whenever possible, and say, now you go to all of your clients and contacts and see who wants to buy this property. And then if no one in the office buys it, then they'll go to their extended network of other people within their company if they've got multiple offices. And then finally, they'll go to their friends who are outside their company, maybe. And then if no one in all of their influence network wants the property, then finally they'll put it up someplace where the public can see it.
Yep.
And so what are you paying for? You're not just paying for my experience, you're paying for my network. You're paying for my ability to be a detective and find the properties.
Right. I love it.
Yeah. Now, but Chris, you're the first broker to ask for this.
I'm the first broker that looks at protecting your interests.
Not only that, but Mr. Buyer, Mrs. Buyer, Ms. Buyer, whoever you are, how many commercial transactions have you done? Well, residential only. I learned this today in another meeting I was in. There was 100 real estate agents on a Zoom call talking about buyer representation agreements. And the presenter said that they did a survey of 12,000 agents. And of that survey of 12,000 agents in the state of California, 97% do not use buyer representation agreements. Now, these are residential agents. Now, if you did that same survey with commercial agents, the number would probably be flipped.
I won't even touch a deal. It's one of these things, you walk into my office, say, hi, I want to buy real estate. I say the first half hour is free. After that, you either sign a buyer representation agreement or a fee agreement. If you won't do that, don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Exactly.
That's how it is in the commercial. We're not going to
Yeah.
do this stuff for free. There's too much time, effort, and energy and knowledge that you have to have in order to do this.
Now, let's just take a second here. Yeah, it'd probably take 2 or 3 minutes, literally. Is the changing legal environment with the NAR lawsuits and stuff. Do you think that you're going to see a lot more residential agents using buyer broker agreements because of what's happening in our current legal environment?
If they want to get paid. At the situation right now, nothing's really changing. Everybody always says, oh my God, this is all changing. And I'm going to tell you, as a realtor, the last thing I like is change. But the only thing that doesn't change is change. Everything changes. So how this is going to roll out is we're going to start using more buyer representation agreements. You want to get paid? You use a buyer representation agreement. The idea there is, and the whole court case is on, I am the listing agent on the house. I went to the seller and I said, here's how I'm going to work for you. And you said, oh, okay, fine. You had ability to negotiate the commission. I then take that, I put it on the MLS. You, representing a buyer, did not have any, you didn't have any way of negotiating your commission with that seller. So basically, that's what the lawsuit is all about. I didn't have a chance to negotiate. You, the listing agent, did, but I didn't. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a buyer representation agreement. I'm going to negotiate with my buyer. And then we're going to work out the transaction like that. You're still, it's one of those things everybody says, well, how buyer doesn't have all this money. How are they going to pay this? It's still going to be the same way. If I buy the property, and we'll use nice round number for Joel because he's a product of the LA City School District, we use $1 million. The buyer says, I'll buy it for $1 million. Seller says, I'll sell it for $1 million. Out of that, let's suppose we're using 5% as a commission. Now, if there's anybody here from the Federal Trade Commission, we're merely using 5% as an example, okay? We're not trying to price fix. That 5% comes out of the seller's net. So $1 million piece of property actually is sold for $950,000. If in fact the seller says, I'm not paying you, you got to get your own money, no problem. I'll buy the property for $1 million. Everything will look like $1 million, but I'm only going to give you $975,000. I, as the buyer, I'm going to give another $25,000 to my agent. It's going to be the same. It's the same. It's just how it's going to balance out in the balance sheet. So nothing's going to change. The seller going to pay the commission. And the buyer's the one who's paying it anyway, because I always ask the seller, where'd you get the money to pay the commission? From the buyer. Buyer's been paying this all along. This is nothing new or exciting. This is just a different way of looking at it. So as soon as we get a handle on this, things are going to go along like they always have. And we're going to get paid just like we always have. You're going to negotiate on the other end of it, though, to make sure you're happy with your portion of the commission.
And I think that the savvy agents are going to use this to show their clients that they can actually save money long term. And the reason is, in California, now it's different in other states, we have something called Prop 13, which means that your property taxes are based on the sales price. And then they escalate up and down from there. Okay. And so if that example of $1 million, really what the seller is looking for is the net amount of their check. Isn't that true?
That's right.
It's the net check that they're really interested in. So you might go to your buyer and say, hey, buyer, the seller is going to expect $950,000 after they pay commissions. So let's go to them with an offer that says, seller, we're going to give you the $950,000 that you expect. And we're going to pay our broker and we're going to pay your broker their commission. But as a buyer, you're going to save property taxes, typically around 1.25% to 1.5% of $50,000 reduced sales price for as long as we own the property or until the law changes. And that's something that you can sell to your buyers as a benefit of them paying your commission.
Absolutely.
How many of you have heard that before? Maybe some of you, but probably not very many.
No.
Why am I paying you the big bucks, Joel?
Well, you're not paying me any more than you already have. And I already gave you the example. Where does the seller get the money to pay me? From the buyer. So the buyer's paying the commission anyway. I have figured out in the short period of time I've been doing a real estate business, I've owned my own brokerage since 1982. It takes a certain amount of money in order to have a successful brokerage, make sure that you're providing the services necessary for your buyers and sellers. And so when you talk about so much, it's not like we're doing a deal every week. We're doing maybe 3 or 4 transactions a year that are commercial, maybe 10 to 12 as a residential agent. And those equate to a situation where I've got to pay for my office. I've got to pay all the expenses of being a real estate broker and then make sure I provide you with the best service possible.
That will do it for today. Joel, thank you so much for joining us, for bestowing all this additional wisdom and history. And boy, I wish I would have been there to see you sign the Declaration of Independence.
I wish you had too. We could have used you. We could sign bigger than anybody else and we'd know who the target was.
There you go, John Hancock, right? Any last word?
None other than the words of a famous real estate attorney. Go out there and sell something. I need the money.
Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned to the same bat channel for more videos on commercial real estate. And sometimes we'll even hit some residential subjects just for your benefit. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to hit like, because that helps this video get out to more people.